So for today, I'll go ahead and start with an introduction to the program and go over its goals and background. From there, we'll have a quick summary of the 2020 burn season, as well as an update for important 2021 information. We'll be going through the procedures and daily schedule that you'll experience each day of the intensive fall burn season. From there, we'll touch on prescribed burning. After that, I'll be passing it over to Jason Branz from the ARB to go over the important meteorology that's relevant to the fall burn, as well as present a few ARB-related topics. After that, we'll finish up by doing a quick tour of the Western Weather Group dashboard website, as well as a review of how to submit acreage files into our system. The very last thing we'll do, we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion. Starting with our history here and the goals of the program, the whole point of the smoke management program is to protect air quality, public health, and public safety while conducting agricultural burns. We want to be able to burn as much as possible while also not affecting anyone's health. As we all know too well from the season and the past seasons of wildfires, it's no fun to be breathing in smoke, and we want to prevent that as much as possible. Whenever I'm talking about the fall burn, the first question I'm always asked is, why do you have to burn anything though? And the reason for that is that burning rice straw is the most effective way to eradicate disease after harvest. And the only other way to do that is using water, which of course is hard to come by, especially this season. So burning is the most effective way to manage disease. Of course, you do get smoke from burning, so a program was needed to manage smoke impacts throughout the valley and maintain good air quality. The fall burn program has existed in the Sacramento Valley for a long time, even going back into the 80s, but the program as we know it really began in 91 with the Connolly Arias-Chandler Rice Straw Burning Reduction Act. What this did is it was a progressive phase down of rice burning through the 90s, where less was allowed each year. By 2001, burning was only allowable via permit from the Conditional Rice Straw Burning Permit Program. This is the program as we know it today. Here, a qualified level of disease has to be found in order for burning to take place. This burn limit is now 25% of the total basin planted acres, or 125,000 acres in total, whichever is less. This chart here shows how the phase down occurred through the 90s. You can see each year allowed for less acreage, and until we hit 2001, when we got to that 25% mark, or 125,000 acres, whichever is less. For some more program history, starting in 2003 is the county ag commissioners that would analyze their fields for disease using random sampling. This was found to be very time consuming and hard to do every single year. So starting in 2009, University of California, Davis began conducting evaluations using random sampling throughout the valley. These evaluations are conducted every 5 years, with the latest being from 2019. And it's this study, which is required, that finds if there's a correct level of disease in the basin to permit burning. Really quickly, we'll go over the diseases that are most common here that we're going to burn in order to eradicate. The most common by far are stem rot and aggregate sheath spot. Stem rot was found in 100% of all surveyed fields in the 2019 study, averaging a 65% infection rate valley-wide. It's most common in low potassium soil. Aggregate sheath spot was found in 94% of all surveyed fields, averaging 35% valley-wide, and is most common in nitrogen excessive soil. The requirement to necessitate burning for either is only 15%. Another disease that we see a bit less but still mentioned in the program is rice blast. It was only found in 9% of surveyed fields and 7% valley-wide. Nearly all the cases were in Glenn County, with a few in Butte and Colusa as well. Here, this disease is affected by high moisture levels, leaf wetness levels, excess nitrogen, and mild temperatures. The requirement for this disease in order to necessitate burning is only 1.8%. Here's the table that came from the 2019 study. It's just here for your viewing pleasure. Go ahead and take a look to see what was found in each county throughout the valley. All right, moving on from that, there are several participants in the smoke management program. The first two here are the Sacramento Valley Basin-wide Air Pollution Control Council, known as the BCC, and the Sacramento Valley Air Basin Technical Action Committee, or the TAC as we know them. These guys are the legal side of the smoke management program. They manage changes to the program, as well as manage things like complaints. Next, we have the Sacramento Valley Air Basin Air Districts, the Ag Departments, and the fire agencies. These are the participants that are going to be requesting permits to burn and are going to be managing those burns on a local scale. The last two on the list here are the California Air Resources Board, known as the ARB, and Western Weather Group. These agencies are in charge of the meteorology relating to the fall burn. The ARB is in charge of air quality forecasting throughout the state of California, and Western Weather Group, that's us. We're a private company that was contracted to provide an extra level of support during the intensive fall burn season that the ARB wasn't designed for. So we're just here to be as helpful as possible and provide those extra details so we can have the most effective burning that we can. Here's a recap of 2020. As we can remember, morale was low. It was the worst California wildfire season on record by a long shot. Over 4.2 million acres burned, with 3.2 million of those already burned at the start of the fall burn season. Currently, right now for 2021, we're just over 2 million, so certainly not great, but at least it's not as bad as last year at the start of the season. Last season featured the longest no burn day streak of the program's history at 24 days right at the start of the season. This was due to thick wildfire smoke from the Bear Fire, later known as the North Complex Fire, that just produced unhealthy and hazardous air quality throughout the valley. In addition to that, winds were out of the north for over half the time, about 60% of the time on the west side, which hampered the number of burn days that we were able to do. We also had the second strongest inversions, so the second highest stability we've seen since the program began, an average inversion of 13.3 degrees Fahrenheit. We did manage 4 less complaints than 2019, but we did burn 4,000 acres less. This was the second lowest burn acreage on record. With that, I'm sure you're wondering about what this burn season will be like. At the moment, it is looking to be a similar sort of global, large-scale synoptic setup. Meteorologically, we're in a La Nina watch, just like last year. What this means is that we do have a slightly higher chance for early season rain. This is especially relevant right now as we do have a slight chance for showers and dry thunderstorms as well from tonight through tomorrow morning. So really hoping for any sort of beneficial rain over those fires, and no lightning, please. Of course, the rain is nice in the mountains, but it does complicate burning operations if it is to occur here in the valley. La Nina also gives us a slightly higher chance for inside slider type storms, which are low pressure systems that dive to the east of California down into the Great Basin. And these induce strong north to northeast winds, which are famous for inducing extreme fire weather conditions. Another thing to look for this burn season will be above average temperatures. Here's some important information for the 2021 burn season. The program will commence on Wednesday, September 15th. That's just next week. And we're looking to go through November 30th. You can see all of our detailed acreage information here on the right. We can see that we have about 61,000 less planted acres than last year, between water being very short, COVID still being a problem. Our burn limit this year is 117,132 acres. As always, our rice burn hours are going to be between 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. with all flames out by 4 p.m. Orchard crop burn hours will start at 8:30 and go up to either 5 p.m. or 1 hour before sunset, whichever occurs first. The program test days are going to be next Monday and Tuesday. That's the 13th and 14th. Here, we're going to be issuing test forecasts just to make sure everyone who wants them is getting them okay. And the air districts will be required to submit test acreage files to make sure that we're getting those files okay. I'll be going into more detail about the test days in an email that I'll send out tomorrow, and we'll have plenty of time for questions as well. So everything we want to do for the fall burn revolves around conservative burn management. What this means is that when conditions are marginal or worse, significantly less acreage should be allocated than if conditions are good or ideal. Unfortunately, we do see challenging conditions in the fall after harvest. We have a much more stagnant and stable air mass since we're losing our peak solar influx and our best lift that we get from the summer. And we're getting into the season where we start to see more north winds. So things to consider when you're allocating acreage are the field conditions, such as the fuel moisture there, as your wet straw is going to produce more smoke and burn more poorly than dry straw. The harvest technique is important for that as well. Spatial distribution, as far as where you're putting the fires, and meteorological conditions, which revolve mostly around stability, winds, and air quality. Going into atmospheric conditions more, stability is all about how your smoke is going to rise and what it's going to do after you light it. Inversions are one of the main ways we look at that. We measure the temperature from Pennington versus the Sutter Buttes. These two locations are very close to each other horizontally, just a few miles apart, but are about 2,000 feet different in elevation. In your normal atmosphere, you're going to lose temperature with height, so it's going to be colder aloft than at the surface. And this is good because you want your warm air to rise, your smoke to disperse. In an inversion, that setup is inverted, meaning that you're going to gain temperature with height. So your hot air at the surface from your fire is not going to want to go anywhere. That's going to be poor dispersion. Mixing layer depth is important. That's how high your smoke plume is going to be able to go. And you'll also measure stability with the strength of high pressure, usually expressed in 500 millibars. Wind speed and direction makes a lot of sense. You're always considering your downwind population. You want to know what the wind is doing so you don't smoke anyone out by accident. Moisture is important, as I mentioned, with fuel moisture and the efficacy of burns, but also if your air has higher relative humidity, that's going to make your burn less efficient. And cloud coverage will increase the amount of time needed for fuels to dry out. Air quality makes a lot of sense as well. This is measured in PM 2.5 concentrations and micrograms per cubic meter. PM 2.5 is used. This is a parameter that looks at particles of pollution that are 2.5 micrometers in diameter or less. These are chosen because these are able to get deeper into the lungs and are more apt to cause health problems and adverse effects. Also considering airport visibilities at Red Bluff, Marysville, and Sacramento. Jason's presentation will go into a lot more detail of the meteorology, and it's perfect for getting a really good handle on that. Here we're looking at the allocation equation. You certainly don't have to memorize this, but we can see that it factors in all the atmospheric conditions that we just talked about. We have our stability from the inversions. We have our 500 millibar heights also talking about stability. We also have wind speed and the air quality. This is one of the first steps in determining how much acreage we can allocate. It spits out a number, and we can use that as an important tool between the ARB and Western Weather to figure out what sort of burn day it's going to be and what's going to be the best practice for the day. Another thing that helps determine how much burning we're able to do is the county acreage distribution equation. This takes into account things like the county weighting factor, which is mostly about size. And then there's air quality, which is considered since air quality isn't always uniform throughout the valley. The acreage is considered, as well as ventilation ratings, which are a good conglomerate of a multitude of atmospheric conditions, how well things are going to disperse. There's also the success ratio, which I believe includes the number of complaints that have been received. So we have a few different types of burn days. Here's a quick overview of those. On our normal burn days, they're going to be called burn days. A minimum of 200 acres per county is allocated. Just because it says normal or permissive, regular, all of that stuff, it doesn't mean the conditions are perfect everywhere though. So it's still going to be very important to read the forecast and be on top of the meteorology. Wet days revolve around rainfall. As I've mentioned, your wet straw is not going to burn as well. Something called the crackle test will be needed to determine if the straw is ready to burn. Restricted field stays, this is where the meteorology is problematic. So acreage is going to come down to just 50 acres of field crop residue per county. Prunings only days are slightly worse than that, where no field crop residue is allowed, but orchard prunings are. We'll go into more of that later. No burn days are self-explanatory. No burning may take place except for pre-approved prescribed burns. And early and extended burn days, these are nice if we can do them. Here, hours are increased due to favorable atmospheric conditions. Here's a chart showing burn day criteria. We'll start from the bottom here. There are two different ways we could end up with restricted fields. First way to do that is if we have a basin-wide average north wind of 15 miles per hour or greater. North winds are not ideal because they're going to blow all of our smoke towards more densely populated areas such as Sacramento and the Bay Area. We can also reach restricted fields by our air quality starting out poorly in this range given here, and also the winds being very light, less than 5 miles per hour on average. So air quality is going to most likely remain that bad, and if we light anything, it's going to get worse in that area. Prunings only, as I mentioned, is slightly worse than restricted fields. Here we can see the air quality is just a little bit worse, higher concentrations of PM 2.5. There are three different ways to get no burn days. Going back to north winds, if they're on average 20 miles per hour or greater, that's going to cause problems. And we can also do that with air quality, kind of a basin-wide average of 30 micrograms per cubic meter, or we can have an average at 3 or more sites of 32 micrograms per cubic meter of PM 2.5. Oh, stability is also important here. We can see all the way on the left, we have that AM stability of greater than 17 degrees Fahrenheit, so very stable there. On your regular burn days, it all starts with the allocation equation spitting out at least 2,000 acres and the ARB not declaring a prunings only or restricted field stays. That's the ARB working with Western weather as well. The allocation per district is a minimum of 200 acres. As I alluded to earlier, just because it's a regular burn day doesn't mean that it's perfect everywhere. However, we might have pockets of poor air quality to watch for, so acreage might come down in some areas, or there might be some other atmospheric condition going on that might make it more difficult to burn in certain areas. Maybe winds are eddying around on the west side of the valley, which would keep the smoke stuck in certain areas versus experiencing those more beneficial south winds. Wet days all depend on rainfall. Allocations will begin to come down as soon as we reach 0.05 inches on average throughout the valley, and then wet days are declared using the chart on the right. If we start from the bottom, we can see if in one day we receive 18/100ths of an inch or greater, that is a wet day. If we continue up, if we get 12/100ths to 17/100ths, but it has rained at least a 1/4 inch or more in the past 3 days, then it's also a wet day, etc., etc. When it is declared a wet day, a crackle test must be performed. I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide right here. So what the crackle test does is it just determines if your rice straw is ready to burn. It's not the most scientific, exactly mathematical equation ever, but what you're going to do is a random sample of straw will be taken from around the field in question, and it's going to be bent sharply, and if it crackles, then it's most likely good to go. It's most likely going to be your growers doing this. So you're going to have to take their word for it. And and it's detailed a little bit more in the section listed here as well. Drying times are important when relating to rainfall. The harvest technique is one of the greatest determinants in seeing how long it's going to take something to dry out. Spread rice looks a lot like the picture here to our left. It doesn't have any one set direction. It's a bit random. On average, it's going to take around 3 days to dry off properly, and you're going to want to do the crackle test on that to make sure. Road rice looks more parallel. All the straw is facing in the same direction and sitting on top of each other more often. This is going to take a lot closer to 10 days, which is a lot longer than 3. Chopped is going to take the absolute longest to dry off. This is where the straw has been cut up and it's going to hold on to moisture very well. In this case, whenever there's chopped straw, the growers must report to their air districts that that's what the field conditions are. And that's just because they maintain such high moisture levels that it makes it quite difficult to burn. It's going to need a lot longer to dry off. Restricted field stays occur when atmospheric conditions are not ideal. Here you may only allocate up to 50 acres of field crop residue burning. You're going to want to be a lot more careful, placing burns appropriately as dispersion will be limited, and you're going to want to wait until later in the burn hours to initiate your burns. That will let the inversions mix out and that stability to be as low as possible. We want a nice unstable atmosphere, which is going to occur in the afternoons. Prunings only days are slightly worse. Only orchard prunings are allowed, so no field crop residue. And this is because the orchard pruning piles tend to burn a lot hotter, which allows for smoke to rise higher and disperse more effectively. No burn days make a lot of sense. No burning may occur except for prescribed burns that have already been previously approved, scheduled, and permitted. Whenever prescribed burns are going on, please let me know or someone in the office know as early as possible. At least 1 day in advance is preferable, but I understand sometimes these things happen same day. So just as early as possible, it's very helpful to keep the coordinator in the loop. Early and extended burn days are very nice when we get them. These happen most often because a storm is coming in. What this does is we have south winds ahead of storms almost all of the time. This, on average, is going to blow our smoke away from the most densely populated areas. We have increased lift and mixing since high pressure is being replaced with low pressure. And also, we don't have any rain yet, so our fields are still dry from being under high pressure earlier. Whenever we want to do an early or extended burn day, you'll see it via the Western Weather Group Smoke Management Program forecasts. And also I'll try to email blast it out so everyone is on the same page and we have as much heads up as possible. Here's an overview of what your daily schedule will be like during the intensive fall burn season. I'll go through each of these steps in more detail, but it'll all start around 5:45. That's when our initial Sacramento Valley forecast will be published and viewable on the dashboard. This isn't a smoke management program forecast specifically, but it is helpful for getting an overview of what's going on if you're up early. At 7:30, Western Weather will be talking with the ARB to discuss the burn day status and acreage. Between 7:45 to 8, that's when we want our air district to publish their acreage files from the previous burn day, so we have all the updated information. At 8 a.m., the burn day status will be published, both emailed and put on the dashboard. At 9 a.m., the main forecast file will be published, having all the info that you'll need. At 9:30, that's when our conference call is going to occur. Highly recommended. You'll be able to speak with one of our meteorologists for more detailed questions, as well as collaborate with neighboring air districts, which has always been extremely beneficial. Somewhere between 10:15 to 11 a.m., the 11 a.m. forecast is updated. That will be put on the dashboard and update. The files will be updated. If we see any major updates, we'll go ahead and email that out. Otherwise, if it's looking the same we'll just have the files updated. So here is what the 545 forecast looks like. As we can see, it's not a smoke management program specific forecast. It's intended for our agricultural clients here in the Valley. Nonetheless, you can still get some really good information for it, what's going on with the winds, temperatures, if there's any chances for rain. It's a broad forecast overview. It will go out to 7 days with also a 7 to 10 day weather outlook. It's good for planning ahead and getting a first look at what the weather is going to be like. Here is what the 8 a.m. file will look like. Here, the burn day status will be declared if it's a normal burn day, restricted fields day, etc. And we'll also have some air quality data from the ARB listed there as well. Also be plenty of room for me or whoever else is the coordinator to put comments if there's anything we feel everyone should look for before the 9 a.m. file comes out. Between that 7:45 to 8 a.m. period is when we want the program files to come in. I'll be doing a detailed how-to after Jason's presentation, but for now, just know that you'll need to go to the dashboard, the database, and enter in your acreage information. By 8 a.m. if possible, 8:15 at the absolute latest. Files can be corrected. Once again, I'll be going over that later. Just be sending in a new file and explaining what the error was. You can also proactively enter in acreage information up to 3 days in advance. For example, if unfortunately we're looking at no burn day sort of period, you can just enter zeros and be done with it. Or if there's a holiday weekend coming up and you know no burning is going to be happening, you can go ahead and get that done so you don't have to worry about it later. Here's a link to where that's going to be. I'll be showing that off again later. And there is also a YouTube tutorial in case you need a reminder. There is a link on the dashboard to that, and you can also just go to YouTube and type in Western Weather Group, and you'll be able to find it pretty quickly from there. So let's go through the 9 a.m. file. This is the main forecast file, and it is a long document. Here on the first page, we can see we get some atmospheric conditions from the ARB, including our air quality, as well as the trend. So we have some PM2.5 in there, but it's not too bad. We have our 500 millibar height. Jason will be going over this a little bit later, but higher numbers are worse. So we can see we lost a little bit of high pressure here. However, we do have a very strong inversion of 29 degrees, and we can see this has increased from the previous day. And our wind speed on average throughout the valley is only forecast to be 3 miles an hour, so very light winds. You can see if we go down to the coordinator comments, just what I want everyone to look out for, and also what the burn day is going to be. You can see we ended up with a restricted fields day, so strong inversion, light winds. It makes sense that if we burned a lot, the air quality is gonna take a dip there. After that, we have some detailed acreage information. You can actually see a little example of something going on here. We see Sacramento's distribution was reduced since their air quality was a bit higher. We can see the calculation for that on a later page. Importantly to note, districts may not authorize field burning on any day before obtaining the burn status or decision from the 8 a.m. file, and the allocations are given here on the first page of the 9 a.m. file. Page 2 is going to feature some more detailed meteorology. So we'll be going into more detail than just that 545 forecast that you saw a little bit ago. We'll be going through a more detailed forecast wind pattern. So if we're expecting a wind shift, we're going to talk about it here. If we're worried about an eddy forming on the west side of the valley and causing some confusion, we're going to try to detail it as best as we can here. This is winds at the surface specifically. For our transport winds, or what your smoke plume is going to do after it rises, we'll be speaking about that here. Right under this, we have our inversion information. As I mentioned earlier, this is taken from Pennington up to the Sutter Buttes, a 2,100 foot difference about. You can see this day had some very strong inversions in the day. And it really no change from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. So just around -6 was forecast. It's around -8 to -10 where things start to get a bit more ideal. Anything less than -10 that's looking a lot better. You can see we also have our basin stability discussion. So we're just putting these numbers here into more words and talking about the mixing heights as well. Cautionary notes, just reiterating what to be careful for. And also the burn day status outlook. These are no official declarations or allocations or anything like that, but we're going to give our best guess on what the next few days might be like. Here on the right, we can see our zone ventilation ratings. These are a good conglomeration of the meteorology we're expecting for a particular zone, but also taking into account the nearby populations for it. So, for example, if we're just looking at some light north winds, perhaps somewhere that isn't very densely populated or has any density or any populations to its south, that might end up with a 2 or 3. But if you're burning in a northern Sacramento zone, you're going to end up with a 1. We'll take a little bit more detailed look at that right here. You can see 1 is going to mean a considerable impact in the region regardless of the placement of fires. So a please do not burn in this zone. We're worried it's not going to go well. And that goes up to 5 being the best, minimal or no impact in the region. Unfortunately, we can only really get that good of dispersion if it's already storming and already raining. So you'll pretty much never see 5, unfortunately. Around 4 is where it's going to be our very best that you'll see normally. And then 2s and 3s are going to be mostly what you're going to see. So considerable impact in the region if caution is not used. Some impact in the region, but the impact is acceptable. On page 3, we're going to see the ARB's forecast. This is going to be very similar to the Western weather forecast, just reiterating a lot of what we've already seen. You'll have some more information regarding air quality. We can actually see a reduction factor was used here since Sacramento's air quality was worse than everyone else's, so their acreage got reduced, or reached a certain threshold, I should say. That's why it was reduced. So you can go ahead and look through all of the information that is presented there, including a 24-hour outlook, some extra comments, mixing heights and winds. On page 4, we have our complaint history up here at the top, as well as some more ARB information. Importantly, here is our file acceptance log. So if you know you submitted your file, but it's not shown up here, you're going to want to double check with us since we didn't get it. Again, just make sure all those are in around 8:15 at the absolute latest. And we can start to see some acreage information from the previous day. On page 5, we're going to get a lot more detailed acreage information. You can see by crop for each county, as well as a nice season to date overview. On the 6th page, we'll have an airplane sounding showing what the atmosphere is looking like, as well as a reiteration of the BAM or air quality summary that we saw on the 8 AM file. In case you haven't read one of these before, the y-axis here is elevation, so going up from the ground aloft, and then this is temperature here on the x-axis. So we can see in this example, we're going up in altitude and the temperature is increasing, so this is an inversion. These are very common in the morning and we don't want them to be strong. Our ideal atmosphere for burning is going to decrease temperature with height. Next up will be the 9:30 AM conference call. This will be hosted by Western Weather Group forecaster and or the coordinator. This is highly recommended for a multitude of reasons. Firstly, if you have a more specific meteorological question that would have taken a few paragraphs to fit in one of the forecasts, this is a great place to ask about it. We can give as much detail as we can. This is also where you're going to want to collaborate with other air districts. If you're planning a burn close to some district borders, it's a really good idea to collaborate and make sure maybe they're not doing a huge burn there, so there's not a ton of smoke coming from the same spot, or if there's a chance that some impact could reach someone else's air district. It's just good to talk and explain so everyone is on the same page. The phone number and participant code have not changed for the last few years, so if you've got that info, you're good to go. If you don't have it, it's right here, and this is reiterated on the website as well. You can click on that and get this info. It's important, try to be on right at 9:30. Most of the time, if someone wants to collaborate, they're going to be there right at the 9:30 mark, so please try to be there within the first, right on the dot, and certainly within the first few minutes. Next up is the 11 a.m. update. Usually, generally, most of the time, this is going to be the same as the 9 a.m. file, just with a little update to stability here at the bottom, how things are going. And we'll just reiterate usually the same things, but if we're noticing something has changed or isn't playing out exactly as we expected, we're going to talk about it here. If there are any of these changes, we're going to go ahead and email it out to everyone. If there aren't any changes, we're just going to upload it to the website, so there's not one extra thing to look at in your inbox. Oh, this is also another place to look at the burn day status outlook if we get another look at the potential for an earlier extended burn day. So as a summary for the decision-making process, you want to carefully read all the program files and forecasts. Certainly want to participate in the 9:30 a.m. conference call, especially if you have more specific questions or if you're planning on burning fields near district borders. You're always going to want to do well-spaced burns when you're planning these out. And you can do that both spatially and temporally, meaning you can burn some areas at certain parts of the day and then burn at different parts of the day if the conditions allow. You're always going to want to authorize only small fires in remote areas if dispersion conditions are looking poor. If conditions are looking good, however, there's a chance you'll be able to request additional acreage. Here's some things you should know before you call and ask, just so that both you and the meteorologist are on the same page. You should know the total acres allocated and the numbers of acres burned. You should be planning spatially where the burn is going to go so that it makes sense. You'll want to have a detailed description of the field conditions to make sure that fuel moisture are good and the meteorology is in check there. A great way to do that is via the dashboard. So you're just taking a look at the latest wind information. Very importantly, you'll want to know just how the burns have been going so far in the day. How have the smoke plumes been behaving? Have they been rising and dispersing well, or have they kind of been coming down or staying a bit close to the surface? You'll also need to know if any complaints have been received so far in the day, and you'll need to take a look at more wind information, the air quality throughout the valley, and always considering the downwind impacts such as population centers and also communicating with adjacent districts. A great way to do this is using the Alert Wildfire webcams. You've probably seen these before. They're initially intended to spot wildfires, so resources can be put on them quickly. But if they're facing into the valley, they're a great way to take a look at how smoke plumes are behaving without having to be out at the field. We can go ahead and take a more detailed look at those later if anyone would like. Here's a little bit more of a random slide, but wanted to share anyway. The most commonly used ignition patterns for rice burning are going to be strip heading fires. Here, multiple lanes of fire will be laid down perpendicular to the wind, and the wind will blow them to a backing, or what's called a back line, where you want the fire to stop. The benefits of using a strip heading fire are that you're reducing the amount of time the field is burning for, since there are those multiple lanes going and running into each other. This will increase the field temperature as well, which will help the smoke rise higher and disperse better. When we hit prescribed burning, we start to hit a bit of a place where Western weather isn't equipped to handle everything that goes on, but it's important to know how it impacts the intensive fall burn season regardless. So you'll always want to submit a smoke management plan, receive approval and permit for that prescribed burn. it's important to request authorization to burn no later than the afternoon prior to the requested burn date. I understand from talking to some air districts that this is hard to do, and sometimes things need to happen the same day. So just keeping communication good between everyone, especially the coordinator. Yeah, just as much heads up as possible is always preferred. Some more information, just reiterating to please let me or whoever else the coordinator is just know what's going on as early as possible. District should approve the burn through the PFERS website so the burn information can be displayed on the PFERS maps. We can talk about this a little bit more later. It doesn't sound like a lot of people are planning on this, but it is a really good website and it's great for displaying that. So I would recommend using it for sure. And this is just sort of a verbatim thing from the rules, but I'll read out: if burning is conducted at or below the daily variable elevation and not higher than 2,000 feet, then proposed acreage is considered part of the local acreage distribution. This usually plays out that these acres that are used for the prescribed burn is taken out of the allocation. For example, if it's a normal burn day, you get 200 acres and there's a 50-acre prescribed fire going on, then you're just going to have 150 acres left to use for other burns. So here is a summary for you. As always, the burn hours are going to be between 10 to 3 or 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. with all flames out by 4 p.m. The program test days are next Monday and Tuesday. That's the 13th and 14th. You'll be getting our forecasts or making sure, and you'll also need to submit the program files by 8 to make sure that we're getting them okay and everyone's up to date on how that's working. Please read the 9 a.m. file carefully before making decisions. Distribute your allocations as spatially and temporally as possible. Watch your field conditions and updated wind inversion conditions. Coordinate as much as possible with your neighboring air districts. Questions or concerns can be relayed to the Western Weather Group forecaster on duty and the coordinator. The best place to do this is the 9:30 a.m. conference call. However, you can also always call the office at 530-342-1700. You're going to receive the highest level of support before noon. That's when the forecaster who prepared much of the forecast is going to still be on duty, but I'll most likely be here later in the afternoon if you do have questions. Very importantly, if you don't have access to the Western Weather Group dashboard or forecasts, please let me know so I can get you added right away. You can let me know in chat here, or you can email me at kai@westernwx.com. Something I should have mentioned earlier, I think we're all aware, but no, and we can see here from this presentation, but no great changes are planned for the program this year. So we're just focusing on doing everything as smoothly as possible and going off a lot of what we did last year. We'll work with what we're given and do the best we can. Okay, now it's time for questions if you have them. Go ahead, you can put them in chat or go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, this is Casey with Colusa County.
Hey Casey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, pretty good, thanks. What's up?
Yeah, it's not really a question, more of a comment, but is there any way that Glenn and Colusa can get more acres per day?
Oh man, that's what our equation gives us. And hey, we have a process for getting more acres in there if we can. Yeah, we'll do our best.
Oh, I know. I'm just joking.
Yeah, but I mean, it's what we all wish for, hoping for a better burn season than last year.
Absolutely. That's all I had.
All right. All right, any other questions, comments? Okay, in that case, it's going to be Jason's presentation up next for the meteorology relating to the fall burn. I'd be perfectly fine with just taking a quick 5-minute break here. So let's go ahead and reconvene at 1:55. How about just stretch the legs and all that, and we'll get going from there. Jason, go ahead and get your slides ready, and yeah, we'll just get started at 1:55.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Be right back.
Seen this before or are already familiar with what we'll cover here, but it's always good to have a refresher. I added one section to this from last year's fall burn training, so we'll hit on that a little harder than the typical stuff. I'm Jason Branz, CARB meteorologist. Been with the program now for about 15 years. Seen a lot of folks come and go, and a lot of changes in the way we collaborate and the way we cooperate. And that's I think we've come a long way as far as communication goes. With that, we'll go ahead and dive in here. We'll talk about stability, mixing, and winds, our three components of dispersion. We'll look a little harder at some weather patterns that we commonly see in special cases here in the Valley. We'll also look at some burn day examples and talk a little bit about the forecast process that we in CARB go through during the morning hours to get this allocation out. And then some tools for decision making, some of which have already been mentioned, but we'll show a couple more links there too. We've seen this slide before. Stability and mixing are our vertical motion that we're looking at for our plume to rise, whereas wind is our horizontal motion for our plume to disperse and move away from the local area. So those are our components that we're looking at in depth today. Kai alluded to this already, but our idealized standard atmosphere is going to have warm air at the surface and cold air aloft. In our temperature profile, if you look at a sounding, which I'll show some of those here in a little while, our temperature profile will bend off to the left. So that means it's getting colder with height. So as the sun heats the ground, that warm air is going to rise with nothing to block it. And our temperature is going to decrease by 3.5 degrees per 1,000 feet. That number is going to vary. That's just an average value, not anything you have to remember, but keep in mind that in our ideal atmosphere, we want our air to rise, our warm air to rise. What we usually see here in the Valley, especially during the fall burn season and later on in the season, is a stable atmosphere that resists vertical motion because air is sinking and compressing. During the day, the mornings are most stable, our strongest inversions, which we'll get to next. And if you're looking out the window, you'll see fog or haze as pollutants build up and don't have anywhere to go. The main feature of a stable atmosphere is our temperature inversion, where our temperature increases with height. And that acts as a lid and traps everything below it, so it's not able to disperse effectively. The inversions, if they're not too strong, will mix out by afternoon as the sun heats the ground, so they disappear. But our temperature profile on the sounding is going to bend to the right instead of the ideal direction, which is to the left. There are different types of inversions. They all form slightly differently. A radiation inversion is the one we're most concerned with. That's the one we most commonly see. A subsidence inversion is under a high pressure center, a larger scale inversion. The marine inversion, if you think of the marine layer, the cooler air, that causes an inversion too. And a frontal inversion, as a cold front comes through when the weather is changing. Radiation inversions, they develop as cold air drains into the valley from the higher elevations and forces that warmer air upward. So you have that inverted temperature profile again. So the warmer air there in red is your lid that's going to trap everything down in the valley below. You can see these pretty well if you travel in the mountain areas or foothill areas. You'll see valleys that are filled with fog. That's most likely radiation inversion. Up above that fog layer, it's warmer and drier, so probably a decent burn day, higher elevations. But down below that, definitely not. Marine inversion is where the cooler marine air moves in from the ocean and forces the warmer air upwards. And we see our temperature profile bending to the right again. So there's our lid trapping everything close to the ground. And this is a feature we'll see in the delta and southern part of the valley during stronger onshore flow events when we get the southerly winds that transport that cooler air in. So our inversions in the morning will be stronger in the southern half of the valley than they will in the north, which is why we look at an average of the north and the south in determining the stability number. As a picture, you can see this if you ever travel to the coast. You'll see the fog coming in off the water, fill in the valleys. You can look at satellite imagery in the mornings too, and you'll see all the coastal valleys filled with this marine stratus, these low clouds. That's indicative of the inversion. So below that, it's very stable, very stagnant, whereas above that, it's warmer and drier, and the any smoke that you put in the air here will rise and disperse if you're above that layer. A frontal inversion we deal with sometimes with an incoming storm system. As the cold front moves in, the leading edge of colder air, that colder, more dense air will plow that warmer air upwards and out of the way. So if you're planning burning, trying to time the cold front, which we often do, if you have a burn that's taken place ahead of the cold front, and then the cold front passes through, you'll experience not only a wind shift, but also an inversion develop. And that could completely change the behavior of your smoke plumes. So we want to keep that in mind when we're trying to time the cold fronts with the incoming storms. Subsidence inversion, this is where we have a large high pressure center over us like we have for the past week or so. So we do have air rising below that because the sun is heating the ground and making that air really warm. And so it is going to rise into the slightly cooler air above that. But there's a layer of warm air that sinks and compresses and warms and leads to an inversion at a higher elevation. So you may have a decent lift below that, but once you get up to that inversion, it'll still act as a lid and trap everything below. And there's our temperature profile. So pretty good, decent bending to the left there in the lower levels, but in the inversion layer, it definitely bends to the right. A good picture I like to show is the county fire from 2018. It had a really good smoke plume going up in the Capay Valley, and it went up to a certain level and then just stopped and leveled off. And that's where our inversion is, and that was under high pressure during the summer. So it was a good example of what a subsidence inversion will do. And keep in mind that anything that does get to that level will eventually mix back down to the surface. What we want to see is an unstable atmosphere, and this is when a storm system is coming in and we're getting some clouds start to develop, or even a day like today when we're expecting some interesting weather around here later. We see our temperature decreases with height, so it's more of our idealized atmosphere. There's no inversion to trap anything below it, and you'll see vertically developed clouds, cumulus, cumulonimbus. This morning we had a really nice example of unstable clouds with what's called ACUS, which are cumulus clouds that are at a higher elevation than typical low-level cumulus clouds. So if you were up early in the mornings like I am, would have seen a pretty nice display of that earlier today. Our temperature profile again bends to the left, so we have nice effective rising of our warm air. Picture form, this is from several years back, cumulus clouds, nice tall vertically developed clouds, clear, pretty good visibility, not a whole lot of haze. So pretty good burning conditions right there. And even in the mornings, if your smoke plume is hot enough, it can punch up through an inversion that may be at the ground and rise up above that into the colder air. But you got to have a pretty hot plume to do that. So we can put this all together now and look at what's called the mixed layer, or the mixing depth. So below our inversion here, our inversion's in the red in the middle of the screen. Below that, our temperature it decreases with height because the sun is warming the ground and that warm air is rising. And there's our temperature profile. But the bottom of that inversion is where everything is going to stop mixing. So that's our mixing height. And so everything below that is the mixed layer or the mixing depth. And for good dispersion and minimizing smoke impacts, we want to see a really deep mixed layer. And typically in the fall for this program, 2,000 feet of a mixing height is pretty common. Later in the season, we'll get to 1,000 and 1,500 as we get into late October and November. So that mixing height is usually going to come down as we get later in the year. But 2,000 is a pretty common number that we look for. Now we can talk about wind, the horizontal aspect of our atmospheric motion. Need to understand wind directions. So what are we referring to when we talk about like a south wind or a north wind? And what processes drive the wind? Here's our compass that we look at for degree directions. When we talk about a south wind, we're talking about a wind coming from the south. So wind direction is referred to as the direction that it's coming from. We like to see for our program, we like to see a wind from the south or the southwest or the southeast. Winds from the north tend to be a little gusty and stronger this time of year, and that can lead to some restrictions. So what drives the wind? We're mainly looking at a difference in air pressure. Wind likes to flow from high to low pressure. The difference in temperature, which can lead to a difference in air pressure. Air is going to want to flow from a colder area to a warmer area to balance itself out. And difference in terrain, which relates to the previous two. We have a lot of widely varying terrain in California. We get a lot of up canyon and down canyon winds, and those are all tied to the difference in temperature and air pressure. The pressure gradient force is probably the most important one we look at. Air is going to flow from high pressure over here on the left to low pressure over here on the right. These lines here are called isobars. They're lines of constant pressure. And where those lines get packed really close together is where we have our strongest winds. So when we're looking at weather maps, which we'll do here in a little bit, we'll look for those lines to see how strong our pressure gradient force could be. Difference in temperature, we'll revisit this marine layer graph again. As our valley heats up during the day, it draws that colder air inland, up through the coast range, through the delta, into the southern valley. And it forms that inversion, but it also leads to some onshore flow, southwest winds in the southern part of the valley and south to southeast as you get further north. A difference in terrain is when we have high pressure overhead and there's no organized wind flow. So terrain driven winds take over. And during the daytime, they're more up canyon winds. As the sun heats the ground, that warm air rises and that wind will blow up canyon or up slope. Whereas at night, as that cold air drains down, the wind is going to blow down slope. Some weather patterns we commonly deal with in California. We'll cover a few of those, talk about 500 millibar heights, since they're in our state regulation, smoke management guidelines, and then talk about how these weather patterns, what kind of dispersion those weather patterns bring. 500 millibar heights, think of a high pressure ridge as a big column of air that's sinking down on top of you. So it's really thick, it's really high. There's a lot of downward pressure of the air. So that's going to trap things at the ground level. Whereas a trough, the air is going to rise because it's colder aloft and it's going to bring precip and clouds and better winds. So we look for a trough for good dispersion and a ridge for poor dispersion. With our high pressure ridge, if we're looking at our 500 millibar chart here, this is one of the first things we look at as forecasters. It gives us an idea of what the overall weather pattern is, how it's going to change throughout the day. The high pressure ridge has a high 500 millibar heights, so a large thickness of air pushing down. Our wind flow under a ridge is typically pretty weak and terrain driven. So upslope during the day, downslope at night. We have strong morning inversions, and those inversions can last a lot longer throughout the day. Pollutants will build up if the high's been over us for a while. We've seen that with a lot of smoke impacts this summer from the fires draining into the valley and just being trapped there by high pressure. So our dispersion is poor under a high. There's not much opportunity for vertical motion, and there's not much horizontal motion either. If we're looking at a satellite image, we'll just look for the big clear spot, and that's where our high is. Large area of sinking air, preventing any clouds from forming. Pushing our storm track up around the ridge. Think of a ridge as a rock and a river. So the high pressure is your rock, and the storm track is your river. It's going to flow around that. More recent satellite image, we can see here that there's no organized wind flow. So the terrain-driven winds have taken over and allow that smoke to sink into the valleys. If there were a more organized wind flow, the smoke plumes would all be pointing in the same general direction. But for this image, there's no organized direction, so it's all just going down to lower elevation. On the flip side of that, a low pressure trough is better for dispersion. One we like to see, at least before it actually moves through and brings us precipitation. Lower 500 millibar heights, so less of a thickness of air to deal with. The winds are more organized, so they're more uniformly south and southwest onshore in the valley here. Our atmosphere is unstable because it's colder aloft. We do have clouds and precipitation, which can limit our vertical mixing. But generally, we think of dispersion as being good under a trough. On satellite, they're a lot more interesting than ridges are. Low pressure out there off the coast of Oregon. All those puffy cumulus clouds, they show up as little cotton balls on your satellite image. Cold front is pretty readily apparent with the sharp line of clouds. And then our onshore winds coming in. And in the valley, they come through the delta. And in the Sacramento Valley, they blow from the south the San Joaquin Valley, they're more northwesterly. A pattern we have been dealing with a lot here in the past several years is the inside slider. This is kind of a ridge to trough transition that doesn't quite go as we want. A big low or a trough moves around the ridge and passes to our east, and that sets up a tight pressure gradient between the high and the low. That sets up a surface high pressure over the Great Basin and a low pressure offshore, and that leads to strong north to northeasterly winds, offshore downsloping winds. And these winds go by several different names. They can be, up here they're referred to as Diablo winds, Jarbo winds, Mono winds. I've heard several different terms for them, but they're all the same process. It's a dry downslope warming wind. And this is where we get most of our really big destructive fires. The wine country fires, which were this particular date here. The Camp Fire was one of these events as well. The Cedar Fire down south back in the early 2000s was a Santa Ana wind event. So these kind of winds are from a fire danger perspective, are problematic for us. What we usually see here, instead of one high or one low, is we see a transition time. And this is where we have to do most of our decision making and burning, and also where we get some of our biggest impacts. If we're going from a ridge to a trough, usually under a ridge, it's been a no burn day or restricted days, and everybody's getting antsy to burn. So keep in mind the atmosphere will become less stable with time. We will get stronger winds, more organized winds out of the south, usually. Have lower 500 millibar heights, so we have better lift of our smoke and our air, and our dispersion will be improving. Keep in mind, however, that these systems can slow down, and that if everyone wants to plan burns for in advance of a storm, if it does slow down, then we're going to have a lot of impacts if everybody's planning at the same time. So we want to check with our neighbors, make sure we know what everybody else is doing. We go the other way, a trough to a ridge. Our atmosphere will become more stable with time. Our winds will become weak and less organized, so more terrain driven. We have higher 500 millibar heights, so more air to push down on us, and our dispersion will be deteriorating. Often as well, and I didn't add this to this slide, but after a trough passes by, we'll have a day or two of gusty north winds, which can lead to some restricted field days or no burn days if they're strong enough. Some common valley wind patterns that we see the strong north winds that are coming down the valley. And then we see south winds that are going up the valley. The south wind pattern is better for our burn program. It's blowing smoke away from the most populated areas in the region, whereas the north winds are doing exactly the opposite. With north winds, we often see them behind the trough passage. So the day or two after the trough goes by, we'll have these north winds. Because of a strong pressure gradient, the pressure is changing rapidly as that trough leaves us. And these can lead to no burn days. That's written into our regulation. And I think Kai showed a slide earlier with those figures. I think it's above 15 miles an hour out of the north is a restricted day, and above 20 is a no burn day during the fall burn season. With south winds, these are what we'd like to see. Usually means we have a system or a trough that's getting close or coming through. So we see a more unstable atmosphere with this kind of pattern. but it's also blowing smoke away from the most populated areas in the region. Also has a pretty decent pressure gradient, not as strong as the north winds usually do. And this is more favorable for burning. Kai alluded to this earlier, but we do see this pattern in the valley with onshore flow. It's called the Schultz eddy. And during the day, the wind comes in through the delta and turns out of the south and southeast as you get further north. But then at night, when the downslope flow takes over and the down canyon flow takes over, it can lead to this little convergence zone to the north of the Sutter Buttes and to the west of the Sutter Buttes. So you get things that are kind of trapped in that area sometimes. It's another thing we need to consider when planning our burns. So we'll look at a couple of burn day cases here, take you through the forecast process that we do at ARB. First thing we look at is our 500 millibar chart. And on this one here, this is from late September, a couple years back. We see a nice trough coming in. We look at the average 500 millibar height over the valley for our allocation sheet. In this case, it's 570. For this early in the season, that's a pretty good system coming in. We look at our sounding here from Oakland. We look at sounding from Oakland, and we look at the APOB from Red Bluff, which I'll show later on. Oakland shows a pretty good inversion, marine inversion, but if you're good at metric conversions, you'll see that that inversion's about 4,000 feet up. So really good mixing depth below that. So a lot of atmosphere that'll be nice and mixed up for us. Look at our surface map next. These wind barbs on the station models, station plots, are pointing in the direction that the wind is coming from. And the little flags on the end of them are speed. So those longer flags are 10, these shorter flags are 5. So we'll see here that we have our lower pressure off to the north, higher pressure to the south. We have some clouds along the coast. And we have pretty good southerly winds coming in through the delta. We take those arrows off. We usually look at Travis Air Force Base to get a good idea of what our onshore flow is going to be. But everybody's pretty uniformly out of the south. So that's a good setup so far. On our allocation sheet, it's a permissive burn day above 3,000 feet, so that's a good sign. Our stability is 3, so that's our inversion strength from surface to 3,000 feet. 3 is an easy number to overcome. It'll mix out pretty quickly. Our wind speed is decent. That's an average of the north and the south. So 10 miles an hour is pretty good. 570 is our 500 millibar height. And our air quality is pretty good too. So our allocation here would be 3,000 acres for the whole basin. And this is the kind of day where you'll probably want to think about requesting extra acreage after everything has been allocated. But make sure and keep up on the weather conditions as the day as we go through the day. Look at our air quality here. Find yesterday's readings on the left-hand side. So it's a little elevated in some spots, but overall not too bad. Some of the max values got a little high, but this morning from midnight to 6 a.m. looking pretty good in all areas. In our comments, we try and add some terms in here that'll give you an idea of what we think dispersion is going to be. We think it's going to be good dispersion today with onshore flow. So that means our winds are going to be more out of the south and more organized. We will see increasing clouds, which is going to probably limit some of our vertical mixing. And then in the second paragraph there, the 24-hour outlook, we try and talk about the next day and a little glimpse into the more extended forecast. So we say onshore flow continue, but take it with a grain of salt because the forecast models are unclear. And usually early in the season, when we start to see the summertime patterns give way to more fall patterns, the forecast models struggle. And early in the season, we start to, or we can see some differences from model to model. So we're not quite as confident in our forecast. Mixing heights, 2,000 feet. That's probably for this kind of weather pattern, it might be a little low based on the Oakland sounding. And then winds will be light and variable this morning. So keep that in mind if you're wanting to get some burns going early, but they will increase and stay out of the south by the afternoon. And then the delta winds are going to be good too. So overall, this is a pretty good burn day. Again, probably think about requesting extra acreage on a day like this. We can look at our surface map for 9 a.m. when our file's coming out. We'll see our high and our low are still in the same position. Still got clouds on the coast. Starting to see some clouds banked up against the foothills. That would lead me to believe we got good, strong onshore flow that's transporting those clouds in. And we got good, uniform south to southeasterly, a typical onshore flow pattern for us in the valley here. Look a couple hours later. This would be about when you want to have your extra acreage requests in. Still got all our same features. Down here, Travis Air Force Base, Vacaville, down there in the Delta, it's still uniformly out of the southwest. Starting to see more clouds in the north part of the valley, which would tell me that trough is starting to push in. We got pretty strong southeasterly flow in the south end of the valley, and a Chico, 20 miles an hour Chico, 15 at Sac International. So really good southerly winds. But we are seeing some northerly winds develop in Redding, so that would lead me to think that the cold front is starting to push into the valley. But overall, it's a pretty good burn day. We can look at the opposite case. This would be later in the season, mid to late October. We see a really strong ridge sitting offshore. That strength of a ridge, 594, is pretty high for that time of year. So we can immediately think of our winds are going to be weak, probably going to be terrain driven, probably going to have an inversion to deal with. Our low pressure is well off to the east. If we look at the Oakland sounding again, we see our inversion starts basically right from the surface. And so there's not going to be any vertical motion here until it warms up. And on top of that, we have a subsidence inversion a little higher up in the atmosphere. So even if you are able to overcome the marine inversion, your subsidence inversion is going to trap it a little higher up. So we're not looking good so far for burning. Check out our surface map. See our high and our low. Our low is sitting a little offshore there. High is over the Great Basin. We see some strong northwesterly winds developing off the coast there. But in the valley, our winds are light. These circles, a double circle like that means that your winds are calm and you're not getting any flow. Off to the east here in the foothills, we're getting air or winds coming down out of the canyons. So really light terrain driven flow, if there's any flow at all. So definitely not a good start. In our allocation, our numbers really reflect that. Our stability of 26, that's going to be really hard to burn off. It's going to take a while. 588 is our 500 millibar height. So there's our really big thickness of air that's pushing down on us. Our winds, that's a good wind number, but we need to know what direction that's from. Because if it's a south wind, that's great. If it's a north wind, that's going to lead to some restrictions. Our air quality is pretty good. We're starting off pretty good there. But our allocation equation spits out just over 4,000. And so we've allocated 2,000 for the day. We look at our air quality. We see, it's not too bad yesterday. Couple of little higher readings in the more populated areas. And midnight to 6 a.m. is not too bad starting off today. So it doesn't look like we've got any air quality issues at the moment. In our discussion, we talk about our inversions. And if that inversion is strong enough, it can lead to a restricted field day. Northwest winds, which is a problematic wind direction for our program. Strong high pressure, so we know that that things are not going to be as good vertical mixing wise. And afternoon temps running warmer. And we talk about the next day and beyond, more active north winds, which again could lead to some restrictions with a tighter surface pressure gradient. Also, I didn't highlight this part, but another system diving down the backside into our east. So it's an inside slider that can cause our fire weather issues. Mixing heights, again, 2,000 feet. That's pretty decent. But our winds, north and northwest directions, get a little gusty later on. So that could be problematic too. So overall, not a very good burn day here. And if we look at our surface maps, that's really going to bear that out. We still got our strong northwesterlies offshore, but our winds are either calm or terrain driven. You know, we get these light northerlies in the north end of the valley, and that's that air draining out of the higher elevations. Light pretty much everywhere else. So no good horizontal mixing. Even down here in the delta. Oops, wrong one. Oops, that's the wrong slide. Hold on. There we go. Even down here in the delta, we're light northerly. Travis Air Force Base is light northwesterly. So no good onshore push that we look for. At 11 a.m., we're still seeing the same thing. Our winds are starting to pick up out of the north now, up in the north end of the valley, which is pretty common for those type of patterns. And those stronger north winds will spread south through the day. But in the more populated areas, we still have light winds. And so any smoke in those areas is going to just sit there and cause problems. And we still have northerly winds in the areas that we look for having onshore winds. So it's not a good burn day. I don't think we got any complaints on this day, but it's just not a good burn day from a lot of standpoints. Couple tools and resources. We'll take a look at PFERS in a minute. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. The high resolution rapid refresh smoke model is pretty good. It takes into consideration the carryover smoke from the previous day, whereas the blue sky model, which a lot of us have used, does not consider that. So there could be some pretty drastic differences there. Blue sky is run for wildfires and for prescribed fires through PFERS. So that's one thing you can see. The California Smoke Blog has the Air District reports, health advisories, and ARA reports from the big fires. That's a really good resource. The alert wildfire cams. I know I've had those up on my screen pretty much all summer, looking at these various big fires. It's both amazing and terrifying at the same time. The GO-17 satellite can be thought of pretty much the same way with these fires going on. Those are really good for watching your smoke in the early morning when the first visible images are available. It shows really well how thick your smoke layer is over the valley. And our National Weather Service offices. The Sacramento Valley is covered by the Sacramento office. Lake County is now under Eureka. They moved over there in March, but that's only change there from last year. That's the end of the slides. Let me jump over to PFERS real fast here, show you a couple spots that you'll want to either bookmark or remember. Under ARB products here is where you'll find all of our burn decision stuff, our burn decision screen. This is for our daily air basin calls. Updates at 3 o'clock every day. We're going to try and push that a little earlier, I think. Try and have that out a little bit earlier. Give a little more planning time, but I can't give you an ETA on that, unfortunately. You can hover over the map and get your 24-hour decision, or click on the map and see your outlook for the next 96 hours. If it's all red, it's not going to be a good dispersion period. Could also factor in wildfires, smoke activity, all that kind of stuff, fire danger. Also under here is our allocation link. The ARB website is undergoing a pretty big reshuffling at the moment, or it has been for the past several months. And a lot of links have gotten lost in that shuffle. So we moved them here to PFERS. So the allocation is available there. This morning was pretty strong inversion, high 500 millibar heights. Winds are okay, but the allocation equation didn't really give us much because the air quality is pretty bad, as it has been for a while. And our allocation reflected that. I forget what the acronym SFONA is, but it's the Sacramento region and outlying areas. If the AQI exceeds 100, it's going to be a no burn day. And we have a list of those. Areas are mainly Sacramento, Yolo Solano district, and parts of Feather River district, and the Sac Valley part of Placer. So up there in like Colusa and Glen and further north, you guys aren't affected by that, but that's on these really high pollution episodes, that it'll be a no burn day down here in the south. Can read a little of Dar's discussion this morning. He talks about inversions, downslope, smoke, delta breeze coming back with trough coming in, and then better air quality tomorrow. Talks about a little bit about our possibility of storms today and tonight. And then finally, our airline pilot observations, our APOBs. So these used to be on a different site too that was lost in the shuffle, so we moved them here. And this is the one we use the most in the valley. Here's Red Bluff. So yesterday's sounding is in black. Today's sounding is in red. So they fly, I think the Red Bluff pilot usually flies about 5:30 in the morning. He calls us about 6, little after 6. So these are, the most stable time of day. And yesterday it was a lot more stable than it is today. So that's a reflection of our changing weather here. So we're in this transition from ridge into trough. So our sounding, our temperature profile kind of reflects that. But you can find those if you want the actual temperature numbers. They're in a table below that, along with the elevations of each site. So typically these fly about 5 or 6 in the morning, and we try and have them on here about 7:30, between 7 and 7:30. So you can look at that for a little more information. Columbia is up in the foothills, up by Sonora, over in that area, Tuolumne County. Bakersfield and Fresno, you know where those are. Paso Robles, Central Coast. So it gives us an idea of what the atmosphere is doing over the state. And I think that's it for me. So I will turn it back over to, or open it up for questions. And if not, we'll turn it back over to Kai.
Yeah, Jason, this is Casey with Eclusa County.
Yeah.
And can you, I don't really get the whole millibar thing, but I know the higher it goes, the worse it is. But for fall burn, what are we looking at? That's a decent day when we're looking at that.
Yeah, if you think of the millibar heights as like contour lines on a topographic map. So the higher they go, you know, the higher it is. With the atmosphere, it's the thicker the air column is above a certain location. In the fall, we're looking for anything in the 570s. In the early part of the season is pretty good. Later in the season, we want more 560s and 550s to be good for dispersion. There's really no one hard and fast number, but if you're in October and you're looking at something in the 580s, probably not a very good day. If you're in November and you're looking at something in the 570s, probably not a very good day. So it's going to get lower. That ideal height is going to get lower as we get later in the season.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Jason, for that presentation. Always super helpful. Are there any more questions for Jason about what he's presented, or any questions for either of us? Okay, well, let's do our last thing here. Let's go ahead and take a quick tour of the Western Weather database dashboard. Let me get that sharing here, just a moment. Okay, here we are. So when you log into the website, this is what you'll be presented with first. I'll go ahead and just refresh everything here. All of your important links are going to be right here at the top, starting from the 545 forecast. Use this, of course, to get heads up on the weather. Your 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 11 a.m. files are all going to be right here. If you'd like those emailed to you as well, let me know if you're not already getting them. Very importantly, we'll go ahead and go through the daily reporting form. There are a few different ways to get here. One of them is this button right here. Another one, if you go to this column over here, you'll have something that says smoke management, and you can go to reporting form. We'll go ahead and just do this. You can also just bookmark app.westernwx.com/SMP for smoke management program. So let's do a quick review of how to do this. First, go ahead and type in your email address so we can get a hold of you if we have any questions. Next bar is going to be the submission date. This is just simply when you sent it in. Like if you were to send me an email right now, it would also have today's date on it. So this is just us knowing when you sent it in. The burn date is when the burn actually occurred on. So if we're pretending we're burning today and it's 7:45 in the morning, you're going to be entering information from yesterday. And just going through here, you're going to pick whichever county you're from, and then just go through and fill out all of your acreage information. If something doesn't apply to you, just leave it as 0. Although, actually, let me take a look at something. Oh, I think this is a new feature actually that we just added. It looks like it actually removes the zones that you don't have. So Butte just has 3 and Sutter has all the way up to 7. That's nice. Anyway, so just go ahead and keep filling out all of your zone information, what was burned, any complaints that you received for that day, and then go ahead and write any comments in here if you need to. If you need to send us something, send it to forecaster@westernwx.com. You could send it to me, but it'll get to someone faster if you send it to Forecaster. In the event you need to correct something, say that maybe you hit enter or something at a weird time and it just sent through something you weren't done with, I'm just going to go back to this page and just re-enter everything. But at the bottom here, you're going to let me know what happened, just describing the error so that I know how to correct things in the database. All right, so that is how this works. As I also mentioned earlier, you can proactively enter files in. So if, for example, you just knew for the next few days you weren't going to be able to burn anything, you could enter for today and tomorrow and the next day and just get all the zeros in if you need to. That we just don't have to worry about it if it's over a holiday weekend or what have you. So there is your review. In case you need that information again, there is a program files video link right here. We're sort of at the bottom of the page here below all the maps. That is available. I'll also be putting one of these training sessions up here. It'll just be a YouTube video so you can watch a whole training session again in case you need to, or maybe if you bring someone else new on and you want them to have all this info as well. Going through some other info that's available here. Here's a reiteration of your 9:30 conference call info, the number and the code. Have a huge variety of meteorological info for you from the latest data, seeing how things are going in a tablature format. Oops, closed the whole thing. To yesterday's data, have links to satellite info. So it's just a good idea to just look around on this page and just click a bunch of stuff. I bet you'll find something useful for you. Here are our interactive maps from our weather stations. You can go ahead and put it on something like wind speed or wind gust, and you can hit this refresh button here. This is 15-minute data, so every 15 minutes you're going to get new stuff. It's just great for knowing what is going on at the moment and your decision-making processes. We also have PG&E data here. These are more foothill locations. They're just placing these in areas of higher fire danger. So not going to be where you'll be burning most likely, but it's still good to see what the conditions are doing. This updates every 10 minutes, so it's a little more constant. Here's our inversion graph. This is what we use, Pennington versus the Sutter Buttes. So we can see this morning, we had Pennington got down to 65, or rather 66 degrees in the morning versus the Buttes were hanging out in the mid 80s. So there's a pretty good inversion there. At around 9:30 this morning, we crossed over and the inversion started to mix out. And as of just about 15 minutes ago, Pennington's up to 103. Lordy, that's hot. And Sutter Buttes are still at around 85. So that's a pretty good lapse rate there. A good difference in temperature. Oh, also interesting, we can see the Sutter Buttes are starting to cool off a little bit with some colder air starting to move in aloft. So that's exciting to see. And as I said, just going around here and clicking on things, seeing if it's helpful for you. You can test it all out. Let us know if something's not working. Here are those wildfire webcams. Take a look. We can see if anything's pointing at the valley right now. Let's scroll over here. Oh, they have one on the buttes too. That's good for looking around. See, it's hazy, matches up with our air quality we're dealing with. And just more information from there. Here's radar. Okay, are there any questions about the dashboard here? You can go ahead and put them in chat or go ahead and just ask them. Okay, well, if that's if there are no further questions or need for discussion, I think I'm good ending it right here a bit early. Thank you all very much for participating. Thank you very much, Jason, for all the presentations this week. Super helpful stuff. Yeah, if you have no further questions or need for discussion, you're welcome to go. Thanks so much for being here, and here's to a good burn season. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Very welcome. Have a good one.
Thanks, Kai.
Thank you.